I found out. My parents had been lying about who I really am my entire life, and the discovery shattered my identity, left me questioning everything, and forced me to rebuild myself from scratch. Alex Mercer always thought he had a typical upbringing in a quiet suburb of Chicago. His parents, Marianne and Peter Mercer, seemed perfect, loving, attentive, and always supportive of his dreams. Alex was the quintessential golden child, excelling in school, sports, and social life, believing every piece of advice, every bedtime story, and every parental anecdote was rooted in truth. It all started with the old box in the attic. Alex had been searching for childhood photos for a social media project, hoping to compile a timeline of his life. The box was tucked away behind stacks of Christmas decorations, dusty and heavy. Inside, he found something strange, an old, yellowed envelope labeled Alex Confidential in his mother's handwriting. Curiosity overpowered hesitation. He ripped it open. Inside was a folder containing medical records, adoption papers, and a handwritten letter from someone named Dr. Lillian Hayes. The letter detailed something Alex never expected. He was adopted, not just as a baby, but in a highly orchestrated secret, with his parents actively preventing him from knowing his biological identity. Shock hit like a punch to the chest. The memories of his childhood birthday parties, family vacations, late-night talks all seemed staged, as if he had been living in a carefully constructed narrative. The realization was terrifying. Every lesson, every value, every word from his parents had been part of a lie. Alex's first instinct was disbelief. There had to be a mistake. But as he read through the papers, details aligned too perfectly. His birth certificate had discrepancies, hospital records didn't match his parents' stories, and the adoption files had signatures of people he had never met. The letter from Dr. Hayes hinted at reasons too complex and dangerous to disclose fully. The next few days were a blur. Alex confronted his parents. At first, Marian and Peter tried to laugh it off, calling it a misunderstanding, a bureaucratic error. But Alex wasn't fooled. He pressed, demanded the truth. And finally, under the weight of his relentless questioning, his parents cracked. They admitted that Alex's life had been meticulously fabricated. He was not their biological child, nor were they ordinary people. His real parents, they claimed, were part of a covert program, something Alex didn't fully understand at first. They had given him up to protect him from enemies, from secrets that could endanger his life. Marian and Peter had raised him as a shield, a cover, a normal life built over layers of lies. Alex felt his identity crumble. Who was he really? Everything he thought about himself, his talents, his personality, even his fears, were they his own? Or were they instilled by the people who raised him? The more he learned, the more his memories turned into illusions. Friends from childhood now seemed like actors in a play, his achievements tainted by the question of whether they were truly his, or shaped by the people who had secretly orchestrated his upbringing. Isolation became his refuge. Alex quit his job, stopped seeing friends, and spent weeks poring over the files, letters, and medical records. He discovered that his real name wasn't Alex Mercer but Elior Kane, and that his biological parents had vanished under mysterious circumstances when he was an infant. He also found coded references to organizations, unexplained funds in secret accounts, and cryptic messages warning of danger if certain truths were pursued. Alex realized that discovering his true identity wasn't just about finding out who he was, it was about surviving the fallout. His life, as he knew it, had been a lie, and the person he thought he was might not exist anymore. The days following the confrontation with his parents blurred together. Alex, or Elior, as the papers insisted, he would spend hours at his kitchen table surrounded by stacks of documents, photographs, and faded letters. Each new piece of information was a tiny puzzle piece, but the image it formed was terrifyingly incomplete. He learned about his birth hospital, a small, nondescript facility on the outskirts of Chicago, the kind of place no one would think to investigate. The birth certificate he had always trusted was forgery, painstakingly created to match the identity of Alex Mercer. Even his baby pictures, carefully labeled by his parents, had been purchased from a photographer's bulk archive. Ordinary images passed off as proof of a life he never actually lived. The more he read, the more he felt like a ghost haunting a life that wasn't his. Elior Kane. The name sounded foreign in his mouth, alien and yet strangely familiar, like a half-remembered dream. The letter from Dr. Lillian Hayes hinted at his biological parents' involvement in something dangerous, some secret network of people whose identities and motives were deliberately obscured. Alex's mind raced. If his life had been fabricated to protect him, why? Who were these people, and why would someone go to such lengths to hide a child? And most pressing of all, were they still out there? One photograph in the folder made him freeze. It was of a man and a woman standing in front of a worn-down building. Their faces were partially obscured by shadows, but Alex could swear there was something in their eyes, some familiar intensity that tugged at him. Scribbled on the back in shaky handwriting was a date, April 14th, 1996. That was just days after his supposed birth. Alex traced the photograph with his finger, feeling the edges curl under his touch. The handwriting wasn't his mother's nor his father's. It was deliberate, cautious, like someone who didn't want their identity known. And yet, somehow, this image had survived, decades hidden in an attic, waiting for him to find it. That night, he barely slept. His dreams were a kaleidoscope of fragments, a woman's voice calling his real name, corridors he didn't recognize, shadows moving just beyond his vision. He woke up drenched in sweat, heart hammering, and realized something terrifying. He couldn't trust his memory. How much of his life had been real, and how much had been orchestrated by people who loved him enough to lie to him. The next morning, he did what he had resisted. He reached out for help. Not to his parents, not yet, but to Dr. Lillian Hayes. The letter contained a phone number, outdated but traceable. After several nerve-wracking calls and cold leads, Alex managed to track down a private research archive linked to her name. When he finally spoke to her, her voice was cautious, measured, almost fearful. "You shouldn't be digging into this," she said at first, then after a long pause, "but since you already have, I'll tell you the truth in fragments. Your life was never ordinary. Your parents' adoptive parents did what they had to, but there are layers you don't understand. Your biological parents were part of a program designed to protect children like you from exposure. Dangerous exposure. If you want the full story, you need to see the records in person." Seeing the records in person. That phrase struck Alex like a lightning bolt. It wasn't a request, it was a warning. But Alex couldn't stop. He booked a flight to the small, anonymous town where the archive was kept. Every step felt like peeling back layers of a life he had assumed was his own. At the archive, he combed through documents that mapped his first years, his parents' disappearances, secret guardians assigned to him, encrypted correspondences between unknown officials. One file made his stomach drop. It was a birth registry from a country overseas. Elior Kane, born April 7th, 1996, to parents who had been part of a covert research group. The document noted he was removed from their custody at 2 days old, placed in a high-security protective environment, meaning his life had been in danger before he had even learned to walk. Alex's hands shook as he scanned the next document. It was a letter written in haste, addressed to someone known only as Guardian Alpha, explaining that Elior Kane must be hidden at all costs. Exposure of his identity would compromise the project, it read. The words made no sense in the moment, but the implication was terrifying. His existence was dangerous. He left the archive with more questions than answers. Who had wanted him hidden? Were they still searching for him? And most importantly, what did it all mean about the man he thought he was? Back in his apartment, Alex stared at himself in the mirror for the first time as Elior Kane. The face staring back at him was the same as always, but now it felt foreign. The eyes that had once reflected a carefree life now held suspicion, fear, and the raw need for truth. He realized that reconstructing himself wouldn't just be about uncovering the past, it would be about reclaiming his sense of self from the shadows that had haunted him since birth. The next morning, he found an envelope slid under his door. Inside was a single note. "Some truths are dangerous. Some truths will set you free. Know the difference before it's too late." Alex didn't recognize the handwriting, and yet he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't turn back. The hunt for his true identity had begun, and whatever lay at the end of that path would either destroy him completely or finally make him whole. Alex, or rather Elior Kane, felt like he had stepped into a new dimension of existence, one where everything he knew had been carefully orchestrated by forces he didn't yet understand. The envelope under his door lingered like a specter in his mind. Its cryptic warning echoed over and over. Some truths are dangerous. Some truths will set you free. Know the difference before it's too late. Determined to take control, Elior began by tracing every detail of his biological parents' lives. Dr. Hayes had hinted at a program, an organization that worked in secrecy, moving children to protect them from unknown threats. The documents from the archive were sparse on context, but they contained names, dates, and coordinates. One name stood out repeatedly: Ronan Kane, his father, and the woman in the photograph from the attic, Clara Kane, his mother. Through social media, public records, and obscure databases, Elior pieced together fragments of their lives. Ronan had been a scientist specializing in genetic research, and Clara an activist in humanitarian programs. Their careers intersected with entities Elior couldn't immediately understand, organizations so shadowy that any deeper search could raise alarms. It was late one evening when the first direct sign of danger appeared. Elior was returning from a small cafe, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, when he noticed a black SUV parked across the street from his apartment. The same vehicle followed him for 3 blocks. His heart hammered. The paranoia he had fought to suppress surged back with full force. He didn't go home. Instead, he ducked into a nearby parking garage and waited, keeping his phone ready. The SUV circled, then finally drove off. Elior realized with a jolt that whatever truths he was uncovering, someone else didn't want him finding them. The next day, he called Dr. Hayes again. Her voice was tense. "You're being watched. You need to leave Chicago. Right now." "Leave? But where?" Elior asked, panic creeping into his tone. "Anywhere you can disappear," she said. "I can help with temporary identification, transport, a safe place to think, but you need to move fast. Whoever is following you won't hesitate." Elior spent the next 24 hours preparing. He withdrew cash from hidden accounts he discovered in the archive, packed essentials, and abandoned his apartment as if he were leaving his old life behind. Because he was. That night, he boarded a flight to a small remote town in Oregon, where Dr. Hayes had arranged a temporary safe house. The safe house was modest, a cabin on the edge of a dense forest, far from city lights and prying eyes. For the first time, Elior felt a strange mix of fear and liberation. He was alone, untethered from the life he thought was his own. Here, he could begin to understand Elior Kane, separate from the persona of Alex Mercer that had been meticulously imposed on him. Days turned into weeks as Elior sifted through files, letters, and fragments of memories he never knew were his. Each discovery was a mixture of exhilaration and dread. He learned that his biological parents had left coded messages for him. Tiny breadcrumbs in letters, journals, and photographs, meant to guide him if he ever sought the truth. But each clue raised more questions than answers. One night, while decoding a letter written in Clara Kane's hand, Elior uncovered a shocking revelation. There was someone else, a sibling, a younger brother born after he was taken from his parents, who had been raised within the same covert network, possibly under surveillance as well. The thought that he might not be alone, that someone else shared his stolen identity, was both comforting and terrifying. The safe house phone rang unexpectedly. Elior froze. The voice on the other end was calm, almost chilling in its familiarity. "Elior Kane," it said. "You've been asking questions you shouldn't. Stop, or the people you care about, what little you think you have, will pay the price." The line went dead. Elior dropped the phone and felt a wave of nausea. He realized that even in this remote town he wasn't safe. Whoever had taken measures to hide him as a baby, whoever had orchestrated the web of lies, was still watching. Every discovery, every step toward understanding his real identity carried risk. Elior couldn't go back. He had crossed a point of no return. The questions he had been asking about his parents, his past, his sibling, were too important to ignore. He was beginning to understand that reclaiming his identity wouldn't just be a matter of piecing together records. It would require courage, cunning, and a willingness to confront enemies he couldn't yet see. Late that night, Elior stared into the forest outside his cabin. The trees cast long shadows under the moonlight, and he felt an odd kinship with their resilience. They had weathered storms, hidden their roots, and yet still stood tall. He realized he had to do the same. He had to survive, to grow, and to reclaim himself from the life that had been stolen from him. And for the first time, Elior Kane began to feel like more than a victim of lies. He felt like a man on the cusp of becoming someone entirely new, someone who would not be defined by secrets, deception, or fear. The hunt for the truth was no longer optional. It was survival, and Elior knew that what awaited him at the end of the path would test every part of who he thought he was, and everything he would need to become. Elior Kane woke to the sound of rain tapping against the cabin's roof, a rhythmic reminder that the world outside moved on even when his life felt suspended. He spent the night thinking about the phone call, the warning that someone was watching him, someone who could harm him if he pushed too far. Yet he couldn't stop. Every fiber of his being demanded answers. The first step was locating his sibling. Clara Kane's letters hinted at a brother, someone close in age who might still be alive and unaware of the life they had been denied. Elior combed through encrypted files, cross-referencing dates and locations. Finally, a small entry in a government database provided a lead, a name, an age, and a city on the other side of the country. He knew he had to move carefully. Whoever had orchestrated his upbringing likely controlled more than he could see. Moving too quickly could put his brother and himself at risk. With Dr. Hayes' guidance, he arranged safe travel, taking multiple detours to avoid detection. When he finally arrived, Elior felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The city was bustling, indifferent to his turmoil. He tracked down the address, an apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and spent days observing from a distance. Through binoculars and careful reconnaissance, he watched a young man emerge, a man around his age, unaware of the secrets that bound them. Elior's heart ached. This was his brother, a part of his life stolen by circumstances beyond their control. But approaching him directly was dangerous. Instead, he began leaving subtle clues, messages only someone from the Kane family could understand, an old family symbol etched on a discarded envelope, letters written in the same coded language Clara Kane had used in her journals. It was risky, but Elior had no choice. He had to awaken a connection that had been buried for decades. Meanwhile, he continued uncovering more about his biological parents. Ronan Kane had been a brilliant scientist, working on genetic research that attracted both admiration and suspicion. Clara Kane had fought to protect children involved in the project, even when it meant making impossible sacrifices. Both had been forced into secrecy, leaving Elior and his brother in the care of others who operated in the shadows. One night, as he returned to his safe house after leaving another clue for his brother, Elior was confronted for the first time. A man in a dark jacket stepped from the shadows, blocking the cabin door. His voice was calm but authoritative. "You shouldn't be here," the man said. "The Kane project isn't finished, and you're stirring things that should remain buried." Elior's pulse quickened. "Who are you? What do you want?" "Call me Mercer," the man said. "You've inherited more than your name, and now you need to decide. Do you want the truth, or do you want to stay safe?" Before Elior could respond, Mercer handed him a small flash drive. "This contains files your parents never wanted you to see. Use it wisely. And be careful. Some truths aren't just dangerous. They're deadly." After Mercer vanished into the night, Elior hesitated before opening the drive. Inside were photographs, correspondence, and documents detailing the full scope of the program, the hidden network of children, the enemies who sought to exploit them, and the measures taken to protect them. Elior realized that the lie of his childhood was only the tip of the iceberg. The world his parents had shielded him from was vast, dangerous, and now entirely his to navigate. In the weeks that followed, Elior began reaching out to his brother more directly. The first message was cryptic, a simple line that only someone connected to their parents could understand. "The forest remembers what the city forgets." The response came quickly, almost immediately. "Who are you? Why do you know this?" Elior knew it was the beginning of a connection that had been denied for decades, but he also knew that reconnecting with his brother would bring them both into the crosshairs of powerful enemies. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders, but for the first time, Elior felt a flicker of purpose. He wasn't just reclaiming his own identity, he was rebuilding a family torn apart by secrets. Yet, even as he began forming a fragile bond with his brother, Elior knew that the threats around him were escalating. The flash drive's contents hinted at forces willing to manipulate, betray, or even kill to maintain control. Every discovery brought him closer to the truth, but closer to danger as well. Elior. Kane had been running for weeks, chasing fragments of a life that wasn't his, dodging shadows that seemed to know him better than he knew himself. Each discovery about his biological parents, each coded message from his brother was a small victory, but victory came with a cost. The deeper he delved, the more he realized how vulnerable he truly was. The safe house no longer felt safe. Mercer's warning echoed in his mind. Some truths aren't just dangerous, they're deadly. And now, Elior understood exactly what he meant. It started with a phone call. A distorted voice, barely recognizable, said, "Elior Kane, you've been asking the wrong questions. Some answers are meant to stay hidden. Stop now, or the people you care about will suffer." The line went dead, leaving Elior trembling but resolute. Fear would not control him. Not anymore. Using the flash drive Mercer had given him, Elior traced the communications of his biological parents. Hidden accounts, encrypted emails, and coded messages pointed to a network of allies and enemies he hadn't imagined. His parents had left him not just a fabricated life. They had left him a map to survive it. It became clear that someone close to him, someone he trusted, had betrayed him. His adoptive parents' actions were protective, but there were others who had orchestrated parts of his life for motives that were far from benevolent. Each file he opened exposed a new layer of manipulation. His life had been a chessboard, and he had been the pawn. Determined to confront the truth, Elior arranged a meeting with someone named Sarah, a former operative in the network. tied to his parents' program. She had been Dr. Hayes' colleague and was the only person who could guide him through the web of lies without trying to control him. Sarah was cautious, sharp, and uncompromising. "You've been lied to your entire life," she said bluntly. "Not all lies were meant to harm you, but some were. You need to understand who your enemies are and who you can trust before moving forward." She handed him a file containing intelligence on his brother, his biological parents' closest associates, and a list of people who had monitored him since infancy. Elior studied it obsessively. He realized the depth of the deception. Even those he believed were protecting him had been manipulated by external forces with their own agendas. The most painful revelation came when he discovered that a close childhood friend, someone he had confided in for years, had been working, unknowingly, for the same forces that had hidden him from his real family. Every memory, every bond, was tinged with betrayal. Elior felt rage, grief, and despair, but he also felt something he hadn't felt in years: clarity. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't change the lies he had been fed, but he could reclaim himself. The first step was confronting his brother. Using the messages he had left, Elior arranged a clandestine meeting in a quiet park, far from surveillance. The moment his brother appeared, Elior recognized the same intensity in his eyes that he had seen in Clara Kane's photograph. A life stolen, yet unbroken. "Elior?" his brother asked, voice cautious, wary. Who are you really?" Elior took a deep breath. "I'm someone you've been searching for without knowing it. I'm your brother. My name was never Alex Mercer. It's Elior Kane." Shock rippled across his brother's face, followed by hesitation, disbelief, and finally recognition. There was a shared understanding, a bond that words could not yet define. Together, they began to piece together what had been taken from them, what had been hidden, and what they needed to reclaim. But the reunion was short-lived. As they left the park, Elior noticed a black SUV trailing them, the same vehicle he had seen in Chicago. Someone knew he had found his brother. They were not safe. Elior realized that reclaiming his identity required more than uncovering the past. It required action, strategy, and courage. With Sarah's guidance, he began setting traps, creating diversions, and learning to operate within the dangerous world his parents had shielded him from. For the first time, Elior felt empowered. The lies that had defined his life no longer had power over him. Each step he took, each piece of truth he uncovered, chipped away at the chains that had bound him. Elior Kane had come a long way since discovering the truth about his life. The attic box, the flash drive, the secret letters, they had all led him here, to the point where he could no longer be defined by lies. Yet, the final confrontation loomed. To reclaim his identity fully, he had to face forces that had stolen his past, understand the choices of his parents, and secure a future that was entirely his own. The night was thick with fog when Elior and his brother, finally introducing himself as Micah Kane, arrived at an abandoned warehouse, the address carefully encoded in one of Clara Kane's journals. Sarah had insisted that the answers they sought were here, that the last pieces of the puzzle were waiting inside. Elior's hands shook as he pushed open the rusted doors. Inside, dim lights flickered, casting long shadows across crates and metal scaffolding. A figure emerged from the darkness. Mercer, the man who had first delivered the flash drive and warned him of the dangers. "You've come far," Mercer said, his voice measured. "Few would dare walk this path." "Where are they?" Elior demanded. "The people who hid me. The ones who lied, the ones who destroyed my life." Mercer gestured toward a table. On it were documents, photos, and a laptop displaying live feeds. Elior saw familiar faces: his adoptive parents, government officials, and mysterious operatives connected to the Kane project. Each had a role in shaping the life he had thought was real. "They were protecting you," Mercer said calmly, "but not for the reasons you believe. Your parents, Clara and Ronan, created a life for you they knew would be safe, but it was never meant to be permanent. Their enemies were powerful. Every move they made was calculated to shield you from forces that would destroy you." Elior felt a mix of anger and understanding. For years he had blamed his adoptive parents, questioned his own worth, and mourned the childhood he thought he'd lost. But now he saw the impossible choices they had made. They had lied, not out of malice, but survival. The moment of truth came when Mercer handed Elior a single file, the complete account of the Kane program, detailing every operation, every relocation, every protective measure taken to ensure Elior and Micah's survival. It also revealed that Micah had been closely monitored all along, his life carefully guided to remain safe without ever knowing the full truth. Elior finally understood the enormity of it all. The betrayal, the lies, the fear. It had been real, but so had the love and protection hidden beneath layers of secrecy. He wasn't just a victim of deception, he was the product of careful planning, bravery, and sacrifice. Turning to Micah, Elior said softly, "Our lives were stolen from us in a way, but we have the power to reclaim them now." Together, they reviewed the evidence, piecing together their shared history and discovering connections they had never known existed. They realized that the lives their parents had tried to protect them from were still dangerous, but they were no longer powerless. With Sarah's guidance, they began dismantling the hidden surveillance networks and securing their independence. Days turned into weeks as Elior and Micah rebuilt their lives. They created safe identities, severed manipulative ties, and forged bonds with allies who genuinely had their best interests at heart. Elior began to integrate the truths of his past with the strength and autonomy of his present. He understood that reclaiming identity wasn't about erasing the lies. It was about embracing the full story, including the pain, the deception, and the resilience that had defined his journey. One evening, as they sat in their new home, Elior looked out at the city skyline. He reflected on the person he had been forced to leave behind, the innocent Alex Mercer who had trusted blindly, and the person he had become, Elior Kane, aware, resilient, and fiercely determined. He smiled faintly. "I don't need to be the child they hid anymore. I get to be me." Micah nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding and relief. "And we get to do it together." The final piece of Elior's journey wasn't revenge or even closure. It was acceptance. He accepted that his life had been shaped by forces beyond his control, but he also recognized his own agency, his own strength, and the unbreakable bond with his brother. Elior Kane had been lied to, manipulated, and hidden away, but through every betrayal and every discovery, he had grown stronger. And now, standing on the foundation of truth and self-discovery, he was free to build the life he had always deserved. A life defined not by deception, but by his own choices, courage, and the people he trusted. As the night settled, Elior finally felt a peace that had eluded him for decades. He was whole, not because the past had been perfect, but because he had survived it, understood it, and reclaimed himself from it. The journey had been harrowing, the truths had been shattering, but Elior Kane was no longer a victim. He was the author of his own story, and this was just the beginning.